Wokeness, once said to have become a hazard to the healthy functioning of our democracies, has dominated Britain's major institutions for years, including the NHS, universities, corporate boardrooms, mainstream media, profoundly shaping and reshaping public conversations around race, identity, gender, and history. Today, across all the political spectrum, a new and pressing question is taking shape. Has wokeness run its course? And if so, what will come in its place? So I'm here once again with Equiano Project Director Inaya Folarin Iman to unpack this. You guys enjoyed our previous video unpacking Islamophobia, so we thought we'd come together again and share our thoughts on wokeness, plus a special announcement at the end of the video. So Inaya, wokeism, wokeness, wokistan, all of it.
Hey, no, I think it's really weird talking about wokeness now for me because I mean, it was a big issue that I spoke about for a lot of my kind of early career, and it's interesting you saying, what comes next and has it run its course? Because to me, it kind of feels like it has. When I talk about it, I'm almost like, oh, I've talked about this like for years. It's just not that interesting, but to some extent, actually, this is the backlash is here, and it's really reached such a fever pitch in terms of the fact that the voters in democracies across Western societies are actually voting explicitly to end wokeness. Really, if you look at it from the perspective of the rise of Trump in his second term, and other parties across Europe. But I think it's really important to define firstly what wokeness is. To me, at least, and I think obviously it's contested. Wokeness is I think this is Eric Kaufmann's definition, which is the making sacred of historically marginalized groups, particularly ethnic minorities, so-called gender minorities, and sexual minorities, and to some extent religious minorities. So it's not just being alert to injustice, which is the definition that I think you might find on Google. It's not. We're all trying to be alert to injustice, and whether that's discrimination or poverty or whatever that might be. It's the specific act of raising minority identities, so-called marginalized identities, to almost a holy status where you cannot criticize them. And actually, and there's often in a hierarchy of identities as well. So Asian, Black are at the top, but even then, East Asian aren't as high in the hierarchy as perhaps South Asian, and then white is at the bottom, and even again, then you almost have Jewish people are even lower than in this supposed hierarchy, and and sometimes these hierarchies clash. So a recent thing has been this whole discussion about queers for Palestine. What happens when you have a group that is seen as intrinsically oppressed, Palestinians or Arab Muslims or something like that, and another group that's seen as oppressed, which is like transgender or other LGBT groups. And what happens when one group opposes the other group? And it's this hierarchy is constantly trying to figure out how we identify people in this game. And it completely removes the individual, completely removes agency, and completely just removes the common human experience. And I just one more point on what it means. I think, I do think it is important to acknowledge that the term originally came from like the civil rights movement, which was about, staying woke, like staying aware of how the racist system in the US was conditioning Black people to think that their hair was ugly or their physical features were not as desirable and beautiful, and various other forms of very real discrimination and oppression that was taking place. But sadly, that has completely morphed into something completely different, which is actually about trying to shut down debate, shut down disagreement, and making minorities equivalent to gods, which we're not, we're humans.
Exactly. And, you know, for this part, I want to talk about, because when we talk about wokeness, it's usually sort of on the critical side, which is fair because there's a lot to criticize. So I want to get into sort of the absurdities that, that happened in the name of wokeness. But did any good come from wokeness? Can you think of, can you steel man this movement in any way?
I think it's really difficult because I think we're still actually even just going through the process of what to understand what a post woke world looks like. So, I mean, in a sense, if we go into a post woke world and that world is extremely horrible and nasty, then maybe we'll miss wokeness. Then, like maybe we might think, oh, actually, like it's the lesser of two evils. But I tend to be the person that supported the status quo ante, which was actually the pre woke moment, which was the fact that we were all supported colorblindness. We all broadly thought freedom of speech was good and we were going in the right direction. I actually think wokeness made racism worse because it saw racism where it wasn't, and it pitted different racial groups against one another, and it made Black people think that the world was much more against them than it was, and it made white people feel like they were responsible for things that they had nothing to do with. And I think it actually made racism worse. So on its own terms, it didn't actually achieve anything that it set out to do. Even if you take issue like LGBT, I've been a long time, advocate for LGBT rights. But the truth is actually that the movement has led to a lesser support for gay equality, because when you demonize again people that disagree with, for example, sex change surgeries, for example, for children, and make that, take this extreme maximalist position, and anyone that disagrees with the maximalist position is a fascist, then you actually reduce support for the entirety of the whole kind of broader cause. And I think that actually, I can't really say that it did anything good. I mean, one thing that you can say is that it brought to the fore thinkers that challenged it that otherwise may not have had attention. But I think even if you think of many thinkers that have emerged during that era, myself included, but there's others like, Coleman Hughes, and I think that these many of these people are remarkable individuals anyway, and would have had extremely successful careers regardless. And I don't actually think that they needed the society to go backwards for them to actually, make a positive impact on society. So I would genuinely say that wokeness has actually been extremely harmful, sadly, and actually just further entrenched elite power, like this movement that tried to pretend that it was some kind of, movement for marginalized people. It actually led to the demonization of the views of actually often working class people. So I've not seen any. Sadly, I can't actually point to anything that's come out of it that's good. But maybe you have a thought.
For me, I just think definitely it did more harm than good, and it recreated racism like to levels never seen before. I just think for me, it did ask some fair questions, whether you agreed with the questions or not. So it became a way to actually examine things that maybe we've taken for granted, like, just assuming, okay, this is how it is. We hear it all the time. Inequality is a natural part of human life and disparities. So this is how it is. Factual, yes, but it doesn't mean that we can't challenge, we can't ask questions, because, the West has thrived on asking questions. We've not just, left things as they are. And I don't think that there's an issue with scrutiny. So if you want to question lack of so-called diversity, fine. If you want to ask if there are unfair hiring practice, there's no issue, or why certain fields you feel are dominated by certain groups. But I think the problem with the problem in itself is not the question, but if you're conclusions to those questions end up creating new problems, once worse even maybe than the original. You're fighting discrimination with discrimination and so on, then that's the issue. That's when wokeness for me fell apart, right?
Well, I think you make an interesting point. The way that I disagree with you is that I think that you accept some of the premises of woke people, which is that they were like almost these almost original people asking those questions. And I actually thought that that was one of the things I strongly disagreed with them on. Like, take the issue of like the wrongs of the British Empire. People have been doing that work for many, many years and examining and looking into that and doing that from, a whole range of perspectives. I think a lot of woke people almost try to suggest that no one had ever discussed or talked about the colonial wrongs before. Like that, of course they have. If we are the beneficiaries, for example, of people in Britain in the 70s, 80s, and to some extent 90s that fought for equality for different ethnic groups and against racism. Like I think that was some of the problems I had with wokeness, that they presented themselves as like this the almost original vanguards against for equality, when that's not true. That many people have and many people continue to and have fought for those things, but not from the standpoint, as you rightfully mentioned, of the woke movement.
Yeah, definitely. I think there needed to be a rebalancing in a sense, because I would sort of hear people say, "Well, things were fine before wokeness," and I don't know if I fully agree with that as well. I think that there were issues to be grappling to grapple with, and definitely I don't think these issues are new or no one was talking about them. But I also thought this idea that we were in sort of a post-racial society. I'm not saying you believe that, but I do hear this pushback a lot, which has become second nature to some people. When I write articles or when you've written as well, I see this a lot. No, things were fine. And it's like, well, maybe things weren't completely fine. So I think maybe they just re-shown a light to certain things that maybe we've taken for granted. I may not agree with their methods or even the premises, but I think a lot disparities still exist in society. And I think just saying, well, this is a natural and this is culture and this is this and that, I don't think that's enough to actually move that conversation forward as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the idea that we weren't in a perfect society, although I don't think perfection was possible. And I think in the hierarchy of societies, we probably were actually, in my personal opinion, and I'll probably get stick for this, but I don't think we were pretty much as close to racial equality in a post-racial society that realistically, like any society has ever been in human history. And I think that that really does count for something. And I really do think that kind of focusing on the minutiae of like whether or not there was like exact representation in every single field is probably like a bit of a luxury actually, which I think that the woke movement actually just allowed us to made us indulge in. In terms of questions of disparities and inequalities, I definitely agree with you. Like obviously not all disparities equal racism, but the truth is that for example in the UK, and I can't speak for any other society, we've had very little growth in our economy for the best part of kind of 15 years. And so if you are someone that's already starting out at in a place of poverty, such as if you are an immigrant from a poorer country, um, economic progress is likely going to be even slower for you in a society that is already economically moving quite slow. And I do think that what I worried about the woke movement, which was trying to understand problems that actually everybody is facing, which is structural inequality, the poor health services, poor education services, and trying to racialize those problems when they're actually issues that all of us are experiencing in different ways, and it's actually not primarily a problem of race, even though it might appear to disproportionately impact people of certain races. That doesn't necessarily, in and of itself, mean that is driven by a racial issue. But yeah, these are discussions, that in a way validates your point that at least they asked those questions and then we can have them. But the sad thing is they weren't interested and have never really been interested in other alternative explanations other than a singular explanation of racism or discrimination. And I think that's why it was kind of doomed from the start.
So is that what caused it to fall apart then? Because it has fallen apart. Even proponents of so-called wokeness are fatigued now. So, what led to this? How did we get here?
I think that it's fallen apart, yeah, because it does have shoddy premises and shoddy assumptions, and there wasn't they never had the infrastructure to scrutinize those assumptions or debate it outright and openly, because debate was very much shut down. I also think, again, a movement that was presenting itself as a movement for the marginalized that actually actively demonized and excluded people that they were claiming to represent was obviously going to fall apart. I mean, an example is the term Latinx, to describe, a gender neutral term for Latino people. But actually, a poll that I recently read that less than 10%, I think it's like 6% of Latinos actually use that term. But this was being enforced by a lot of elite woke people as the future of how we describe Latin people. And similarly with the global majority, I mean, I've never heard any ordinary ethnic minority ever use that term. And I think actually I find it quite insulting. But somehow elite woke spaces are using this term left, right, and centre, despite the fact that it has no resonance or usage from ordinary people. And so again, those are just two examples of the language and discourses that were used by this movement never actually came authentically from the people that it was claiming to represent. And that's why you saw with Trump's multiracial coalition, whatever people think of Trump, he substantially increased his vote amongst Black men, Latino voters, and other minority groups, because actually they want what most white people want, which is good housing, good schools, good jobs, and trying to appeal to them solely on their race, which is one slither of who they are, or their needs, is really not going to cut it in the long term.
People just want to eat and buy nice things. That's a universal human thing. Okay, so what's next then? What's next for wokeness?
Yeah, so this is exactly what we are asking. We've got an event on May 29th, called After Woke, What Comes Next. It's partly around Musa al-Gharbi, who's a very interesting American thinker who's coming over to the US. He's got a book that was recently published called We Have Never Been Woke, and it's really talking about how this was very much an elite movement and never really represented the interests of working class people. It's being hosted by Helen Lewis, who is a writer for the Atlantic magazine, and also Ralph Leonard, who's a contributing writer to Unheard, who comes at it from a left-wing standpoint, a critic of identity politics. We're hosting this in London and would love for you to join, because it's not just about the debate and discussion, a core aspect of the origins of the Equiano Project, pushing back against a lot of identity politics narratives, but it's also about an opportunity for you to meet myself and Ada and a community of individuals that are thinking critically and deeply and interestingly on all of these questions that you hear us talk about on our YouTube channel: identity, free speech, religion, immigration, national cohesion. All of these things is a meet and greet, it's a social, it's a place to relax. So come and join us for the debate and the discussion, but also for an opportunity to just unwind on an evening in a beautiful venue with some great, curious people.
Amazing. It's definitely going to be fun. I really can't wait for that. So great convo, Inaya. Thank you so much again. And yeah, we hope to see you on the 29th. And for our audience, leave your comments on this discussion below. Drop all our contacts are on the description as well. So if you have any questions about the event, if you need, any assistance, anything, just, get in contact. Our virtual door is literally always open. So until next time, take care.